For 25 years, the National Training Agency, the NTA, has been the leading body for technical and vocational education and training, TVET, in Trinidad and Tobago. Established in 1999, the National Training Agency is a state agency under the Ministry of Education with the primary regulatory role of rationalizing and reforming TVET. Trinidad and Tobago has positioned itself to become a manufacturing center for renewable energy in the solar and wind energy industry. This supports the growing demand in the Caribbean for alternative energy sources that are profusely being explored by the government of the country. The International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, forecasts that Latin America and the Caribbean is expected to grow their installed solar capacity by a factor of 40 by 2050. To service this demand, Trinidad and Tobago proposed a manufacturing cluster to ensure synergies and cost efficiencies. The National Training Agency, in its capacity to inform the nation of the available training areas, will focus this segment of Skills in Action on solar energy. Facilitator of this segment, Mr. Sion Faria, founder of Solar Occupational Environmental Safety and Health Company Limited, SOESH. SOESH Consultancy Limited was founded in 2015 and provides services that specialize in solar energy solutions, evaluations of compliance with health and safety standards, and environmental assessments. Mr. Faria will now be sharing his insights on sustainable energy being solar energy.
Hello, good morning. My name is Sion Faria, the Managing Director of SOESH Consultancy Limited. And today I am going to show you guys a quick and small demonstration about how solar energy systems work. Now, solar energy has been used for over 50 to 60 years commercially. However, in Trinidad and Tobago, it seems to be more on the back end due to the fact that we have a lot of our investments and our energy generation from fossil fuels and other forms of energy. So today, as I said, I will get into a small demonstration as to how a solar system works, the different components, and what it can generally run on different types of systems. So before I start, there's something that needs to be known about current. Current can be broken down into two forms, AC current or DC current, right? Now, AC current stands for alternating current, and it is the current that we are most familiar with. That is the current we use in our homes, businesses, the regular 110 volt currents, 220 volt for AC units. That is known as alternating current. DC or direct current is what solar is primarily generated as. So as we can see from the demonstration I have here, this is the solar panel, this is the charge controller, this is the inverter, and this is the battery. Now, in a solar energy system, it generally consists of these four components. Let us start with the solar panel. Now, this is the most familiar part of a solar energy system, the solar panels. Now, what this solar panel does is that it converts photons or light energy from the sun and converts it into DC current or direct current, right? After it converts the photons into DC current, it is sent to something called the charge controller. Now, as the name suggests, the charge controller controls the amount of charge that comes in from the solar panel. After it regulates the charge, it sends the charge to the battery storage located right here. Now, this battery, it is a lithium-ion batteries. There are a number of different batteries you can use in solar energy systems, but the most popular one and the most, I would say, the most energy efficient one is known as lithium batteries. Now, this is what is used in hybrid vehicles, electric vehicles. Now, after the solar panel takes the energy from the sun, sends it through the charge controller and sends it to the battery, there's now something called the inverter. Now, this inverter is known, as the name suggests, it inverts the current, right? Now, remember I mentioned earlier that in the form, solar energy comes in the form of DC current. This inverter inverts the current from DC into AC, which is what we can then use to be distributed throughout our homes. Now, you all will be familiar with this breaker box. This breaker box is what are in most homes. So a solar energy system, the inverter connects directly to this breaker box. And this breaker box then distributes the energy throughout the home so that you can use it in many different applications. Now, with that being said, solar energy in Trinidad is, as I mentioned earlier on, it is not the forefront of our energy generation. However, it is a growing field. Now, there are many factors as to why it isn't the primary form or it is the most viable form of energy right now. Now, in Trinidad, we currently are subjected to some of the lowest electricity rates in the world. Now, because of that, it is not a big incentive for the average Joe to want to convert into solar energy because usually the startup costs of these solar energy systems tend to be more on the pricier end of things. Now, all the components I'm showing you here, most of these components are very cheap, but the most expensive part of our solar system, and is what is the part that actually hindering anyone from going in the direction of solar, is the battery. These batteries are usually extremely expensive due to the fact that it uses rare earth materials. And these rare earth materials, because as it says, it's rare, when something is rare, it becomes valuable. So that being said, the battery, the production of these batteries is what's hindering solar from being the most affordable. However, our companies specialize in making smaller, scalable systems, such as this one. Now, this one is not a real-life example. This one is just a even smaller, scaled-down version of how the system works. But we specialize in small systems where anybody could jump out, anybody could come out and run their systems on solar energy. Right now, these systems, these smaller systems, more designed to run more 110-volt appliances. However, it can be later upgraded to 220-volt appliances. Now, that is in the event that there's a power outage. You could still use your TV, you could still use your radio, charge your laptops, phones, and these different things. Now, these small systems, surprisingly, can run high-load equipment. So, for example, this is a 7-amp drill, hammer drill, and I will demonstrate for you that these drills can still be run from this small, tiny system. So if you have any power tool works to do at home, any DIY projects, a solar system is very good for these kinds of applications. So in recapping, the solar system consists of 4 main components: the solar panel, the charge controller, the inverter, and the battery. Now, I also forgot to mention, there's also another hindrance in terms of solar energy becoming more viable in Trinidad. With regards to the price point, there's another factor as well. The other factor is that incentives in terms of bringing in energy generation systems. Now, I know there are existing incentives in terms of solar water heaters, solar panels. However, if you're bringing in certain solar batteries, it's not technically covered under the Duties and VAT Act, right? So you wouldn't be exempted from bringing in these on their own. You would still have to pay duties and VAT if you have to bring in these. However, if you have to bring in the panels, and I believe to extend the charge controllers, you wouldn't have to pay no duties and VAT. But I know they are currently adjusting the laws right now, so I don't want to speak ahead of myself. But I know there's some form of effort being put into making solar a little bit more affordable to the consumer in Trinidad and Tobago. So I also wanted to talk about in terms of how these systems are connected and integrated into one another. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the solar panel directly talks to the charge controller. Now, the solar panel, think of the solar panel as a battery. It has 2 ends, a negative end and a positive end, just like a battery here. Now, remember I mentioned that DC current, the solar is generated with DC current. So DC current is usually 2 wires, a negative and a positive. So the negative wire and the positive wire connects directly to the charge controller. There's a negative and a positive side of the charge controller. That then converts to the negative and the positive side of the battery itself. So think of it as this solar panel needs to communicate to the battery, but it does so through the charge controller. So there are two wires coming down, a negative and positive. It goes to the charge controller, and the charge controller then sends the power to the battery itself as a negative and positive, right? Now, these connections it's usually pretty standard. Your average electrician should be able to make sense of what's going on here. It's pretty simple, but however, only licensed personnel should attempt to install one of these panels or one of these solar systems themselves. Now, some of these solar systems can have very high voltages. Some of these panels could go up to volts up to 600 volts. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't think anyone wants to be shocked by 600 volts, right? So be very mindful about when installing these. Consult the electricians, use proper safety wear, gloves, rubber gloves. So continuing, so from the battery, remember I mentioned the negative and the positive terminal that comes from the panel. The inverter now, as you can see here, there's a negative and positive terminal as well. These negative and positive terminals also connects to the battery itself. And remember, as I mentioned, it's a DC system, direct current system here because there are two wires. Now, when it comes to the inverter, as I said earlier on, the inverter inverts the current from DC into AC. So now there are it changed from two wires. When it comes on this side, it is three wires, right? And three wires are in the form of 120 volts current. So it goes from 12 volts, this is a 12 volt battery, and it inverts the current up to 120 volts, which is what is used in our homes and businesses. So, as I said, be very mindful of these systems. Now, there's a part of the system called grounding a system. Now, from what if anybody knows about electricity, grounding a system is extremely important, especially in solar systems. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are high voltages you deal with in these solar systems. So it is very important that there's some form of grounding, because you don't want, if there's some fault in the system, for you to become a conductor of that electricity. You will basically get electrocuted. So please be mindful about when installing these kinds of systems, especially in, if you're not too familiar with it, please consult the electrician. Even though it is simple, it is still dangerous, and simplicity can give rise to, people being a little bit more lackadaisical, a little bit more careless with stuff. You might think, okay, yeah, it's easy to do, I could install that, but that is when you could let your guard down the most, and that is when most amount of hazards could potentially happen. So be mindful of the systems, be mindful of the voltages that run through these systems, and it's simple to learn. Anybody could still jump onto it, but as I said before, consult the electrician before attempting to do so. Once again, my name is Sion Faria, Managing Director of SOESH Consultancy Limited, and thank you for having me.
For further information, contact SOESH Consultancy Limited at 277-6527. Email SOESH consultancy@gmail.com.